Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carson Beane. In the firearms industry. I am studying Vista Outdoor Brands.
My name is Clegg Monroe. I'm in the firearm industry as well, and I'm studying Ruger.
And my name is Joshua Smith, also in the firearms industry, and I'm studying Smith & Wesson.
So, for our industry description of the firearms industry, this encompasses the design, manufacturing, distribution, and sale of firearms products. In this line of business is handguns, rifles, shotguns, assault weapons, optics and scopes, as well as ammunition. The firearms industry is unique and heavily regulated industry with government intervention and licensing, background checks, and manufacturing stipulations. Some of the major companies in this industry is Ruger, Smith& Wesson, Remington, Sig Sauer, Winchester, and many more smaller companies, although these are the big conglomerates.
Some of the internal and external constraints that the firearm industry has to deal with. Um, some of the internal are brand reputation. We have customers that have been shopping generationally for as long as the companies have been open. And if our companies did something wrong and those people didn't like it, then they would probably switch companies and no longer shop with us. Some of the operational costs that we deal with would be manufacturing and inventory. Sometimes we hold inventory longer than we would like to. Um, Innovation challenges: if another company in the industry makes a product that is better, more innovative than what we have, then some of our customers may end up switching over to that product. And product liability: if we made a product that injured one of our customers or injured other people, then we would end up facing lawsuits for that. Some of the external constraints would be government regulation. It's becoming more and more common to have more gun control through the government. And another one would be public opinion advocacy. The public opinion of guns is always shifting and changing. Um, and then supply of customers. We never really have a good enough data on if customers are coming in and out of the industry or not. Um, and the market competition, there's so many different manufacturers of guns and other weapons that just makes it so if one company comes out with something that's better than all the other companies, they're going to take a large percentage of that market.
For our SWOT analysis, some of the strengths we identified for the firearms industry is high barriers of entry, generational brands, and established market demand. So some of the high barriers of entry with government regulation cost, the brands that are there to stay. Generational brands as well. This kind of plays on the higher barriers of entry as well. Winchester is over 200 years old. Remington's over 200 years old. Smith& Wesson is back to the Westerns with the Colt 45. They have been around for forever. So these brands are established, well documented, and have many customers reliable to them. And the established market demand of customers being there. If they hunt, they will hunt until they die, or they are no longer physically able. So those customers we can rely on. Some of the weaknesses in the firearms industry is the diversification of revenue streams. With such a high barrier of entry and so many regulatory costs, it's hard for a brand like Smith & Wesson or Winchester to get into another line of business like apparel or optics. They just have to stay in firearms manufacturing. Government regulation can eliminate our business in a day if required. High liability exposure. We could have to have product recalls, lawsuits, and regulatory fines and fees based off of the type of industry that we're in. Some opportunities for the future: international markets. Although gun satisfaction and sentiment isn't high in other countries, our brands are established and well qualified to be in those markets for recreational growth, which is one of the other opportunities. Because people sometimes are shooting now not to hunt, but just to put holes in paper and see and for competition. And then e-commerce growth, as in every other business, e-commerce is a huge growing industry, and we see this as a big plus for these brands to have direct to consumer operations. Some of the threats, again, government intervention. This could totally wipe out our industry within a day. Public backlash. If people don't like our companies, they won't shop with us ever again, and even sway some of our generational buyers. And market competition. Although there's few industries or few brands in the industry, these brands are constantly at each other, trying to edge more market share to their companies.
So now we face some of the common risks that we see in the firearm industry, and they've been broken down into four groups: hazard, operational, financial, and strategic. Starting off with strategic risks, there's often a lot of controversy around the public perception of firearms that we kind of discussed in the last slide with the SWOT analysis. If the public perception changes in a negative way, it can cause a huge risk to the company as a whole and can lead to decreases in revenue. Along with this, we also face supply chain and component shortages. As time goes on, as we saw through COVID, sometimes the supply chain and distribution operations that have been set up can be impacted in a negative way. And if we can't meet demand, we lose out on a lot of sales, and that causes some big problems. Finally, we also face brand quality and reputation risk. Finally, if we start producing cheaper products or use different sources for our raw materials and our product quality decreases in a way that affects the end product that gets to the customer, it can lead to a lot of difficult challenges and we can lead to losing customers. Next, we face hazard risk. Hazard risk include poor manufacturing. Again, kind of the same thing as like the strategic risks. These two overlap. If our manufacturing decreases, customers will no longer trust our products and we lose customers and eventually sales. Shootings, public shootings are obviously a hot topic that are front page of the news all across the US. Shootings are not good for our reputation or for these companies' reputations and can again lead to a decrease in sales and goods being stolen in transit. Obviously, with shipping firearms, there's obviously a risk of these weapons getting into hands of the wrong people, which is why there's such a large secondary illegal market for these weapons. So keeping them safe is a high priority. Then we have operational risks. Theft or loss of inventory, specifically by employees or people who have access to the weapons, is another major risk for us. Again, part of owning a firearm company, you take on a responsibility to keep these weapons out of harm's way or people who can use them to do harm. So having proper safeguards in place to guard against things like theft is very important. And another important issue down there is regulatory compliance issues. The government has set a lot of regulations in regards to what can be manufactured, what can be sold, where it can be manufactured, and where it can be sold. So following these is extremely important to stay out of legal trouble and save the company money. And finally, we move on to financial risks. Demand fluctuations occur constantly. During COVID, especially with all of our companies, we saw a massive peak in sales. With Smith & Wesson in particular, we saw about $300 million gain in revenue from 2020 to 2021, just because people were panicking. Now, these demand fluctuations can be hard to predict, but it's important that we have a good idea of where sales are going to go in the future. And also, another very important thing with financial risk is the regulatory and legal risks, specifically fines. For example, Smith & Wesson right now is facing a lawsuit in the state of Massachusetts because Massachusetts state they violated some of their laws in regards to sales to people they don't seem fit to own guns. So these fines can lead to massive punitive punishments in the legal courts and can lead to hundreds of millions in losses.
So it's the top five risks that we associated with our industry. We'll start from legislative risks. So that would be enhanced government intervention, such more regulations being put down on firearm industry companies. Will you even be able to own a gun if there's more legislative and regulations that come down on the public? Increased barriers for firearm owners, such as more background tests, background checks, and stuff like that. And what guns could a citizen own? Like, would it just be handguns, or maybe they allow AR-15s to stay around? Public perception is a huge risk because mass shootings have been prevalent the last few years, and because of that, a lot of the public is kind of not getting behind guns as much as they used to. The use of firearms in public is a highly publicized event. It's all over the news. People see it everywhere on social media. Backlash from activist organizations is also a big thing because the public will follow whatever is the trend in the news right now. Another risk would be demand fluctuations. It depends on the customer base. If customers are wanting more guns and if there's a panic, then they're going to buy more guns. Expectations from customers, innovative products, and market competition between other companies The legal risk would be liabilities, lawsuits, compliance with regulations, and then a way that gun companies are protected from that is the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act in 2005, which helps protect companies from civil lawsuits resulting from their firearms. And then some regulatory issues would be the cost of regulation, manufacturing standards, the fines and fees from not complying uh, with regulations, and the increased ATF presence.
Some interesting statistics that kind of highlight some of our two biggest risks in the industry are 60% of Americans are in favor of stricter gun laws, which would have a drastic impact on our industry. Needless to say, if people don't want guns and products that we're selling, they would like it to be hard to acquire that, our sales would be definitely impacted. Another statistic which I found very interesting is that this is the number of senators who voted in favor of gun regulation in 2022, with 15 of these senators being Republicans who voted across the aisle for this bill to be passed. And for our case companies, Ruger in specific has had problems with diverse revenue streams, government regulation, and public opinion, with Smith& Wesson having market competition problems, as well as government regulation and public opinion. And Vista Outdoor Brands has government regulation, public opinion, and business fragmentation. These are very important for us to understand because the government regulation and public opinion are across the board. This is for everybody. If these threats and risks are realized, we can lose our industry within months, days, hours, if that comes down to it. So public opinion is important for us to address and stay in the good graces of our customers, as well as people who are ambivalent on our stance. And our government regulation is highly volatile and important. Every 4 years, laws can change, but we don't want this to affect our business and our industry, as we have seen with all three of these companies lowering their manufacturing abilities of assault rifles or never making them in the first place.
So now we look into some of the similarities and differences between the companies as part of these risks. Obviously, since all of these companies revolve, at least in part, around the sale of firearms, we have a similarity of legislative risk. All of our companies get affected by some of these laws in the same way, whether that be what can be sold, where it can be sold, how much of it can be sold, who it can be sold to. All of this affects the sales of these companies in a basically even way. Now, I say that with one, big regard in mind. Ruger and Smith& Wesson, almost all of their sales come from the sale of firearms themselves, with their secondary source of income coming from accessories. And Vista is a little bit different in the way that their main source of income is more separated.
Another similarity between the case companies and just as an industry as a whole would be the public perception. All three companies rely heavily on how the public perceives their products and firearms, and if public perception of firearms is bad, all of our companies will suffer. So if there was a mass shooting at some point, then the whole public looks to see maybe what gun they were using, but they're more just over the fact that guns are being used to hurt innocent people, and so that just destroys the public perception of our industry and can really make us suffer.
And one of the differences that we've identified within the industry is segmented businesses. As we just mentioned, Ruger and Smith& Wesson do rely heavily on the sale of firearms for their primary source of income. However, Vista Outdoor Brand is different. They're in the business of mergers and acquisitions, and they have bought a gun manufacturer, Remington, and that is not their main source of income. Their main source of income is through apparel and outdoor gear, whereas Remington is a crucial part of their business and business model going forward. It has not been the main source of their income, and this has allowed them to diversify their revenue streams and not be effective solely on government regulation, public opinion. However, I see in the future Smith& Wesson and Ruger trying to adapt this business model as well to kind of alleviate some of these risks. Thank you for your time, and we will see you in class.